Hello, everybody, and welcome to Books in Hindsight. I'm your host, author Matthew Hines. Today we have an amazing show. We have David Burkus. David Burkus is the author of Friend of a Friend, Under New Management, and The Myths of Creativity. We're going to bring David out in a minute, but before we do, we just want to remind you, Books in Hindsight doesn't advertise, and we don't monetize on YouTube. We get our support directly from you. So if you like listening to these authors, the first thing you can do is go to booksinhindsight.com and go to the Books in Hindsight bookstore and click on any of the links for one of David's books or any of our great authors. Go to our t-shirt shop and order one of our great designer t-shirts. This spring, Podcast Guest is a big hit, as well as Born to Read. If you want to support us even more, you can go to hindsight.com where my books are available, or go to patreon.com/hindsight and sponsor us with a monthly sponsorship of $3, $5, or $10. All right. With all of that said, let's bring out David Burkus. Let's go to the phones.
Welcome to Books in Hindsight, the only podcast where hindsight is always 2020. And we explore the great books, works, and ideas of the century. Now, here's your host, teacher, and author, Matthew Hines.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Books in Hindsight. As I promised you, I have an amazing author. I have David Burkus here with me, and David is a multi-talented individual, and we're going to try to pin him down today and find exactly what he's about. But we're going to be talking specifically about his books, and the first, or the latest, I should say, is Under New Management. Another one of his books is called The Myths of Creativity. And, I'm sorry. The first book that you wrote, and my notes are wrong, is Friend of a Friend. That's the last book that you wrote.
The most recent. Yeah.
Okay. So the last book that you wrote is Friend of a Friend. I just started my notes a little far down. So today we're going to be talking about what it is you do, and just a little bit of background on David for our podcast listeners. David has spoken at such places as Microsoft. He's spoken at Google. He's spoken at the U.S. Naval Academy. And David, you'll be glad to hear I've had two Annapolis graduates on the program that talk a little bit about some of the stuff that you're going to be talking about today when we talk about leadership. So with that little bit of background on you, David, welcome to Books in Hindsight.
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me. I love the Annapolis connection. I did not attend. I've just been privileged enough to lecture, but it did earn my allegiance in the Army-Navy game every year. So we proudly cheer, go Navy. Although this has been a pretty rough stretch. We had a great stretch for the last 10 years, and now it's a little rough. But we're still Navy family in our house. All right. And David, are you teaching right now? So I still have
right now, but
we're in class right now. I'm just there. No, I'm kidding. So I have a faculty appointment still at Oral Roberts University. I teach. I'm sort of on a permanent sabbatical in a sense. I teach one class a semester. I get paid for that. I don't get paid a full-time professor salary just for that one class a semester. But I still have the appointment, and I'm involved in. I do a lot of meetings around how we're shaping curriculum and that kind of stuff. But the majority of my time these days is spent writing. The majority of my time is spent on an airplane traveling to places where I'm going to speak, trying secondary to writing on stages, et cetera. And then when I am privileged enough, doing shows like this.
Wow. All right. Well, that's not really, I mean, one class, that's, excuse me, that's just enough to assign your kids to buy your books to read it for text or course material, right? That works out perfectly. And
so the first book, so Missive Creativity is actually a required reading in one of the different courses that I teach. But the thing that I always tell them is like, look, there's 40 of you. I don't need your sales, right? That's the equivalent of $80, and I'm gonna buy pizza at the end of the semester for all of you. So I'm gonna spend more than that on you. So trust me, I don't need that. It's just it makes life so much easier because the alternative would be handing them tons of different articles and case studies and making them read a ton of stuff. Well, we'll do the condensed one instead.
All right. Well, you dodged that question quite successfully. And David, we're in the middle of this scandal, this academic scandal. And I hope towards the end of the podcast, we're going to have time to come back. But you're teaching what? What are the classes you're teaching?
Yeah, so I'm the token psychologist in the College of Business. So I've actually never taken a business class. I learned how to read a profit and loss statement from a course on Udemy that I took when I started running my own business. But every business school has the organizational psychologist, the person that studies how people in the organization work. And then you end up teaching classes like human resource management, organizational behavior. For a long time when I was teaching a full load, I also got to teach a really fun class that was originally called business communications. And I turned it into here's how to network, how to find a job, how to get a job, and then how to actually come off as semi-intelligent in that job class. That was really kind of one of my favorites to teach and one that students took a ton. That was a lot of fun. And some of those insights turned into friend of a friend, but that was probably the course I taught the most frequently. But yeah, like I said, my background's as an organizational psychologist. So anything that involves that human behavior element of business, that's what I had my hand in.
So what's your academic background? Is it in psychology then?
Yeah. So the master's degree is in specifically in organizational psychology. And then the doctoral program that I did, technically they called it strategic leadership, which is really when you change the name from org leadership or organizational psychology, what you're really doing is for lack of a better term, search engine optimization. People don't know the term organizational psychology, so they don't search for doctorates in it, right? So what do they search for doctorates in? And that's why it was called strategic leadership. But yeah, all of that training. Now, fun fact, my undergraduate degree is in English. So that's why I say I've never taken a business class, etc. I didn't study it in undergrad. I took English because I went into undergrad thinking I wanted to be a writer. And I came out of undergrad thinking a very different type of book to write than when I went in. But yeah.
All right. Well, that is just blowing my mind. And the wheels are really turning now. So on your bio on your website, it says that you are teaching leadership and motivation. Are you still teaching those?
Yeah, well, so my appointment is technically I'm the associate professor of leadership and innovation. So in the spring, I teach a class that's right now it's called Creative Thinking in Business. That is the innovation and creativity class. In the fall, I teach the principles of leadership class for seniors, and then there's occasionally sort of graduate students that are half studying, half TAing for me in that class as well. So leadership, and hence where leadership and innovation came from. When I was I should say before all of this crazy arrangement, when I was full time, they just gave me the blank title of management. Which, when you see someone as a professor of management, what that means is we give them a weird collection of stuff, and we just decided that's the best word for it.
Okay. Now we're going to, just so the listeners know, we are going to come back because we really are going to spend a lot of time talking about the topic of leadership and organizational management. But right now, I got a big question. David, I don't see how you could be old enough to do all these things. Did you go to USC?
Did I go to USC? Yeah, we didn't grow up dirt poor, but my parents did not have enough money to buy a sailboat for the tennis coach or whatever. I'm still catching up on these stories. Like literally, I'm working on a new project and I was in airplane mode on all my devices until about 3 p.m. yesterday, and then I got online and got on Twitter and was like, "Wait, what happened?" And I've been reading articles emails ever since about all this stuff. No, the easy way to answer your question is I went to university, normal 18, 19-year-old went to university, and I met a girl who wanted to get married and wanted to go to medical school. And we got married the summer after that because I knew like med school is going to dominate 80 to 90 hours a week of her time. So the only thing I could figure out how to do to sort of keep pace with that is I had to get the job so that we could eat. But then I basically was working full time and going to school full time and still spending less hours a week studying than she was while she was in med school. So that was sort of a lot of how we fast tracked through those things. Cause that was for the first 4 to 5 years of our married life, the only dates we went on were study dates.
Wow. How exciting.
I don't miss it. I would much rather go on the dates we go on now, but that's life.
She's pre-med, so you could always play doctor.
I'm not touching that.
All right. So let's go back to something we haven't mentioned yet, and that is your podcast. The podcast is called The Daily Burk. Could you talk about what you're talking about on your podcast?
Yeah. So the idea for the Daily Burk was to do sort of short, actionable, everything is between 2 and 4 minutes tips. All of them are based in social science or based in prior writing that I have. So we run the gamut between tips on creativity, tips on networking. Today's is actually sort of how to survive a team meeting when you've got that person that is over talking and just dominating the conversation. Anything that is, we try and do tips on Adam Grant stole this line, and I think it's fantastic. He says he tries to make work not suck. That's basically the goal of the Daily Burk too. We're trying to share tips that help people do their best work ever, or at least make the company that they're currently in a little more survivable. And we do it primarily on video. I found that people are responding more to video than audio in our ever scrolling social media world. I had someone literally tell me yesterday that, hey, I watch the Daily Burk every day with the sound off. I just read the captions underneath. And that's apparently the world that we live in these days.
All right. So obviously, David, you are a busy man, but you've got obviously a very strong and I guess elaborate message. So let's go back to talking about, because this is Books in Hindsight, let's just talk about a very short progression of the books that you've written. So the first one you wrote, if I'm not correct, then just tell me, The Myths of Creativity. Is that your first book?
Yep.
All right. So what was the inspiration? Why would you feel that is something, that's information that need to have, especially because, I mean, creativity is so hard to even nail down. So what are the myths?
Well, I would say it is and it isn't. So the through line through all of my work, if we're I didn't have to look back in hindsight to catch this. There's my pun of the day. The through line through all of my work is that I'm trying to use social science, specifically psychology, because it's my background, but any other of the behavioral sciences and the social sciences to explain misconceptions about how work works. Creativity is one that is layered with misconceptions, hence the myths of creativity. It also helps. I was 29 when that book came out, so it helps to start with a subject that a 29-year-old is allowed to speak to, creativity being one of those subjects. But the goal was to clarify those myths and misconceptions. So there's a number of them around how it works, and one of the biggest being you hear people say all the time things like, "It just came to me." Right? Well, where was it before? And so talking about that kind of eureka, aha, there's this tendency to assume that ideas come from somewhere else. You hear people even today talk about the muses and that kind of stuff, and most of that is ridiculous. There's two fundamentals at play. Ideas are combinations of pre-existing ideas. So the more you learn, the more raw material of new combinations you have to play around with. And those aha moments usually come from a period of incubation. So you've got to be looking at your calendar and knowing that I have to go back and forth between times where I'm doing sort of the deep thinking or the deep work of trying to come up with this creative thing and times where I'm letting my mind take a break. Sometimes that's juggling projects. Other times that's actually scheduling in like the midday walk, or a lot of people say, oh, I have my best ideas in the shower. Well, it's because it's sort of most adults don't require a lot of thinking to shower. Like we got the routine down, hopefully when we were teenagers, and we haven't varied from it that close. So it doesn't, anything that's that sort of routine, it lets the bigger, more calorie demanding areas of the brain kind of relax. And the truth is we don't know what happens when they do that relaxation, but we know that after that, ideas come out better and more frequently. So it can lead to that aha feeling where ideas come from elsewhere. Those are sort of some of the personal myths of creativity. There's also a bunch of misconceptions about how it's supposed to work in teams and which departments are creative and not creative and that sort of thing. And that was really the goal, is take aim at all of these misconceptions and then point to the research that said, no, here's how we know it works from nearly 100 years of studying creative people and companies and teams, and then providing positive examples of companies that are prolifically creative, companies like your Pixar, IDEO, et cetera, because they sometimes intentionally, but largely accidentally have been in line with the research on how creativity is supposed to work for a long time.
All right, that is fantastic. And okay, so going back, organizational psychology, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about creativity in an organization, and you cited Pixar, but creativity really depends on how much that company is going to accept creativity. Isn't that correct? I mean, let's look at automakers, right? We just saw Ford go down the tank, and I think, as far as their car production went, and I don't think anybody's going to argue they lost the creativity battle. So when you're talking about organizational psychology, is this something that you address of how to channel? I don't know if that's a good word, but channel creativity to foster it or to develop it?
Yeah. So we talk about team dynamics of how, brainstorming sessions are supposed to work and that sort of thing. But what you're talking about really is captured in the last myth in the book, the last chapter of the book. And I call it the mousetrap myth. It's this misconception that we recognize great ideas when we're immediately presented with them. Right. And if you know business history, it's full of usually senior executives not getting brilliant ideas. And so, Xerox invents the personal computer, Kodak invents the digital camera, right? All of those sort of things. The other misconception is that ideas come sort of fully formed, right? So when somebody's even presenting the first draft of an idea and then it gets shot down, now you've got no ability to sort of develop it and massage it. I love there's a line that Ed Catmull, one of the founders of Pixar, uses, that he says that we don't get an amazing movie like The Incredibles right off the bat. In fact, every movie starts as an incredibly dumb idea, and the creative process is the process of getting it from suck to non-suck. And that involves changing it, shaping it, giving it feedback. But, like you said, what are the things that a lot of organizations unfortunately succumb to? The first is the idea that someone's first draft of an idea is a fully formed, pitchable idea. It's just not. And then even if it were, we're not all that good at recognizing new ideas when they come out. We need to actually allow space to sort of test them, to democratize them. So we look at a couple different organizations that do that really, really well. Pixar being one of them. I'm also a big fan of, there's the company Adobe that makes Photoshop and PDF, et cetera, has this really, really cool program where anybody that's got a testable idea can request like some micro funding and then some materials on how to prototype an idea. And the only thing that is required, they get like $1,000 gift card and a bunch of prototyping materials. And the only thing that's required is that they have to share what they learned at the end of running their test. Right. So you look at like this massive R&D budget that we're used to. Instead of doing that, let's break it up and let anybody test an idea and get it a couple iterations further than when we normally judge ideas, so we can actually see the value of it.
All right. So is there, we were, like I was just saying, that the difference between a creative company and an innovative company is getting those ideas up. And, we were watching, who was Tucker? Remember that car maker, Tucker?
I don't, but okay.
Oh, well, if you're in this business, you got to see it, because there's a classic line in there where he's in court and they've accused him of being a fraud, and they said, "Oh, you're spending all this money on R&D. The big three don't spend any money on R&D." So that kind of that played out, in our time now, but. Within a company's creativity structure like Pixar, can you talk about what there is in it that makes it successful, or not giving away trade secrets, but what makes them so successful?
Yeah, well, so there's a couple different things to plan. How you treat an idea is one. What the reason we settled in on the myths idea is that what I found in doing the research is that the way that companies talk about creativity and innovation is different in and of itself, right? So a company like a Pixar or IDEO or Continuum, which are industrial design firms, et cetera, will talk a lot about the process, right? Whereas supposedly the kind of non-creative companies will talk about just sort of like the idea. A lot of these companies too, innovation actually just means new technology, right? Which is acquired or licensed. That's why they don't have big R&D departments, right? Where it's just focused on the idea, the belief that over time we can take a terrible idea and make it into a good one through adding in new values, through researching it, testing it, refining it, et cetera. Those sort of things are sort of foreign. So, I mean, I would say of everything, that's probably the biggest piece of advice that I give to leaders is I summarize it often as saying we don't need our people to have more great ideas because we have a bunch of ideas to already work with. What we need is to recognize those ideas and get committed to the process of developing and refining them. It's that suck to non-suck kind of process. And you'll hear it said most often, even as the phrase trust the process, which is just saying that there is a way that we can come out of this process with a great idea. It's not the idea finding thing that so many organizations that are struggling on their creativity and innovation are looking for is just, oh, we just need a great idea. Let's look anywhere. I mean, this is why you've got that sort of phenomenon of the CEO or some other leader reading a new book, and then suddenly everybody is doing that flavor of the month initiative until they read a new book again with some other idea. It's because you're searching and running around for ideas instead of saying, we got plenty of raw material that let's commit to the process of working together to refine these ideas.
Yeah, so let me just try to sum up for the lay person. So you're basically saying what's in-house. We know the processes we have. We know the product we produce. We know how to do this better. And so there's no real, I mean, we don't really need outside ideas. Everybody that is doing this or doing their job in the company probably has enough ideas already. And we need to tax that, right?
Yeah, we need to get better at finding those ideas, listening to them, and giving those people space to test those ideas. And you know, ironically, that's what sort of led to the second book, Under New Management, which is about a lot of homegrown changes in the management initiative that are presumably how you lead these creative teams, et cetera. The majority of which are around giving people more autonomy and more say in how their work gets done. And if we can do that inside of the bounds of control, then those people's ideas will improve and benefit. And then we don't need to hire all these outside consultants and what have you. I would say the other thing too is really listening to, you know, there's the dichotomy between a lot of organizations are focused on idea finding and really creative organizations are focused on problem finding. What's the right question to actually solve? How do we actually get empathy for our customers to understand where their frustrations are? Stuff that isn't necessarily captured in an Excel spreadsheet reporting on sales numbers and that sort of stuff. You see that a lot of times as well.
All right, David. Well, you've got such great ideas. All right, so that's the myths of creativity. Let's talk about under new management. And before you jump into this, I want to ask you, when you're talking about a company's corporate, culture, when you want to get ideas out of people, but how do you make how do you not say, well, these guys that have been to college, the engineers, well, they have legitimate ideas. These guys down on the line, well, they don't really, their ideas are great, but how do we know who to listen to? And is there a way a company can recognize that everybody has a good idea? And my last question is it a good idea to tell your company we're looking for new ideas?
Yeah. So let me answer the first part first. I love that Adobe idea I was talking about earlier. They call it the kickbox. This idea that we're going to let people. My friend Peter Sims would call it little bets. We're going to let people place little bets on a lot of different ideas. Meaning, we recognize ideas can come from anywhere, and so we're going to give everyone the ability to at least test the idea and see if there's something promising there. In Myths of Creativity, Adobe hadn't come out with that program yet. In Myths of Creativity, I write about another company called Right Solutions and several companies have followed suit on this, that actually started sort of an internal idea stock market where you're given virtual currency every year and anybody can post an idea. And what happens is other people read that idea on the internal. It's almost like a Wikipedia thing, but it actually ranks things by, or upvotes or downvotes them by how much currency people put in. But the other thing you can put in is comments or offers of, hey, I've got some time to work on this, or did you think about that? And so it's the currency piece is important, but what's more important is how many other people are seeing the idea and then volunteering, right? The beautiful scenario happens when someone who's on the line in the production side sees a problem and has a rough idea, and then those highly trained engineers you were talking about see that idea and go, well, yeah, and here's what we could contribute. And then you've got something that's really got momentum. And so what Right Solution does is any idea that gets to a certain point gets tested. If it becomes a product or if it saves money because it's a process thing, then a lot of that profit actually gets shared back with the people who invested it and put time in it as a sort of end of the year bonus, not based on overall profitability, but on, hey, this idea did really well for us, and so here's your thank you for it. So that was the first part of your question. I forget the second part of your question already. Sorry.
No, I hate it when people forget the second part of my questions because I've already forgotten them by the time we got started.
Well, hopefully everybody who's listening, that was a great enough answer because I don't remember what else I was supposed to say.
Yes, it certainly was. I think we were just talking about the how we foster creativity and who we listen to and how things get implemented. So with just not having that last part of the question answered, let's go over to your experience with the military side of things. Now, I've had two Naval Academy graduates on, and they my question to them is, when you're in the military, you're basically following. I mean, they're teaching you to follow directions. And why is leadership so important? And is it important to be an innovative leader?
Yeah. So one of my favorite Navy stories in particular, my experience with the U.S. military is every branch of the service has its own personality, right? And the Navy is one that is very, very systems driven. And it's actually in the Mousetrap Myth chapter, we talk a bit about the story of William S. Sims, who was a captain and later a gunner and later a captain and all sorts of things on ships in the Navy, and came up with a way to adjust gunships and guns for the waves and target enemy ships in a way that was far better than what they were currently doing. But he then did what he's supposed to do and sent it up through all of these little systems and consistently got rejected, like 7 times got rejected. And it wasn't until he finally sort of went around everybody and wrote a package, like a dossier for the president, who thankfully opened it and said, like, what is it? Get this person back on shore, get him at the war college. We need to be implementing this. The reason I point that out is, again, you've got that focus on systems, and we often then promote the people who are the best system followers, right? There's a recognition of this in most of the armed services, and especially in the Navy now. And so you see what used to be these standout stories like Abramoff and It's Your Ship, or David Marquet and I'm blanking on the name of his book, but it was essentially about how you sort of share the work of leadership with a variety of people. I would say to the average military leader, the advice that I give a lot of them is actually one of creating what Amy Edmondson, the researcher, would call psychological safety. Just wherever I have responsibility, I want to make it my goal to let everybody who orders to me know that I'm not going to judge them based on the ideas that they submit. I'm first going to appreciate that even if they're submitting criticisms, even if they're submitting crazy ideas, et cetera, we have this psychological safety where those things can be submitted. It's one of my pet peeves, and you see it especially in systems-driven organizations, are phrases like, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions. That's actually backwards, right? Because the people who spot problems usually aren't people with great ideas to solve it. Those people need to connect with the people who can solve it. And you only do that if people are actually willing to share problems. There's a difference between that and just griping and being negative. But and that's what we're trying to get at with the don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions thing. But unfortunately, the message that gets sent is just do your job, be a good little soldier. We'll reward that conformity, and eventually you'll be a rear admiral, and you don't have any ideas because you don't know where to even find the problems. So that psychological safety piece is the one that I think most of us need to focus on. Ironically, Amy has some great work on it But it was actually Simon Sinek in his second book, Leaders Eat Last, where he actually talks about militaristic cultures and this idea of psychological safety. He doesn't use the term. I don't even know if he knows he's describing psychological safety, but that's what he's describing. And that's what, especially in systems-driven cultures, I think is the biggest kind of leadership lesson or leadership change that needs to happen.
Okay, yeah, and I think that I was in the Army, so definitely I didn't see a lot of innovative or creative thinking beyond the crazy things I used to say. I used to say, why don't we use crossbows? Why do we have to shoot people? And everybody's going to know where we're at. So, they
would be silent. No, that's actually accurate. I just watched. I was on a lot of planes recently, and I watched The Equalizer and The Equalizer 2, these Denzel Washington movies, and he fights with a lot of different tools, and then you realize that he's doing it because he needs to be silent. And yeah, you're right. A gun would immediately point out where we are. I think the range on a crossbow, though, is a little bit limited, so that might have been the reason why they did.
I like that close quarters stuff. It looks good.
Right. Well, that's very Army of you. That's not very Navy. Navy, we're miles away.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. All right, so we lost track of that question that we asked, and I think I want to get back to this because I think we're talking about Under New Management now, your second book, and the question is: are there personalities, are there politics that might get in the way of a company fostering creativity, like? He's the boss's kid, and so what he says goes, or you don't want to talk to that person. Or even the old sexism. Have you seen, and don't say any names, but have you seen obstacles to creativity based on personalities, based on old world stuff?
Yeah, I'd use the term organizational culture, not necessarily personalities. As a recap for those that are unfamiliar, so Under New Management is actually a collection of different, more modern workplace practices, things that are every once in a while there's an Inc. magazine article about that crazy company where there's no bosses, right? And my goal was to actually look at a lot of those different practices and go, is there research that supports this? Are these companies just crazy, or do they represent the future of sort of where work is headed? And my thesis is that this is, as more and more people in an organization are responsible for problem solving and for creative work, this is where we're going to be headed. So in terms of your question on organizational culture, yes, we know that those sort of command and control styles, any culture where nepotism is present has way bigger problems than the lack of creativity. But those command and control styles are hugely important. The other thing, and this could speak to sexism, but it can speak to a lot of different us versus them or in-group, out-group kind of phenomenons, is when we get too attached to not only the top-down level of the hierarchy, but the segmentation of the hierarchy. Like the problem that I have with most organizational charts is that it then creates this tendency to define a team as anyone who reports to that next person up. And you end up with those silos and politics and turf wars that we're talking about. And when you look at a lot of modern, really innovative organizations, what you see is a ever-changing hierarchy. It's not totally flat, or it's not matrixed, because those things turned out to be relatively crazy. But we know what the formal org chart is, but there's a culture that says, yeah, if you need to sit in on this project, even though it's not even in your department, because you can add value, we'll give you the time and space to do that. What I call it in the book, writing the org chart in pencil, meaning, yes, we write it, but we're constantly erasing it and changing it based on the needs of the products that we have now, the customers that we're serving, et cetera. And those organizations tend to be more innovative, more creative. They also happen to be less sexist, less classist, less racist, et cetera. They're far more integrative, which is what we need.
All right. So let me just ask you this. Do you have if I'm a company and I want you to come and speak, are you going to be able to look at my company and say, these are some of your strong points and these are some of your weak points, or you'll just come in and you will talk to my company about the things that you're talking about now?
Yeah. So I would love to do the first. I will tell you most often it's the second, right? So someone inside the organization reads one of my books and then says, yes, we really need people to hear about this, which is unfortunately kind of contributing to that flavor of the month mentality. But where I try and come in a lot of times when I'm working with an organization is tell stories that can be adapted as our story and can change that language and that culture. That longer term sort of consulting, let me do this whole sort of organizational analysis. It's hard to do that and then in a 90-minute speech or workshop convey all of that information. That's a much longer term thing that's fun, but it's really quite intensive and usually can't be done kind of on its own. So normally when I'm working with an organization, I'm relying on the leaders inside the organization as, yes, our analysis is we realize we missed this. And can you come in and talk about it so that we then, after you talk, can talk about how we apply those things?
Yeah, and then it's probably better to make sure that their check is in your account before you start doing any of that. So,
yeah, that's very true.
All right. Well, we're over halfway through this, and you keep saying things, and I'm not getting to the questions that I really want to answer or ask you. So, we're talking about leadership in the company, and you teach one class at Oral Roberts University, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so
one class per semester. Right?
Yeah, and just as we agreed about the books and all that. So anyway, by the way, I just want to mention, again, it's davidburkus.com. I don't know if I even mentioned this. I was so excited to get going. But it's davidburkus.com. And from that website, you can find his podcast, The Daily Burk, as well as his books. And I want to point out, if you're watching on YouTube behind David, there's a blue books, red books, and white books. And I love the color coding, very American. But those are the 3 books we're talking about. So, David, I have to ask you this. When you're talking, obviously you're at Oral Roberts. You have probably a Christian or a pretty strongly ethical background. Could I be safe saying that?
Yeah, it's a fair assessment.
Okay. Do ethics and of course we can't say your personal faith, but do ethics play a part in the message that you give to companies?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it depends on the book, right? I mean, the ethical lesson in Friend of a Friend is don't be a sleazebag, right? Like when you're networking, don't be that person that's using everyone, right? Take care of the community, trust the community will take care of you. The ethics. So, I come from an evangelical Christian background, and one of the predominant ideas in that is this idea of servant leadership, which on a personal level, just as an academic researcher as well, is a great idea that there's not a lot of evidence for. Theories like Bass and Abiolo's transformational leadership and things like that tend to work better. All of that said, one of the through lines throughout most of Under New Management, the second book, is that there is the work of management, the scheduling, deciding, budgeting, et cetera. But a lot of organizations these days are finding that work is too important to be left to managers alone. And therefore the manager's role is actually, how do I get the team the things that they need in order to do their best work? That looks a lot like servant leadership, right? Mm-hmm. So we end up sort of talking about it without it intentionally talking about it. And some of that is by design because my target is a much broader group than just that sort of evangelical business world, even though that's where I come from in a university setting. I'm trying to reach a much broader audience. So there's that sneak attack. Now, that said, the flip side of this also happens. I get in a lot of trouble in those circles around the myths of creativity because one of the things that I take aim at is the eureka myth, the sort of divine inspiration, ideas come from the ether. The thing that I say is it's sort of a bit like gravity. The rules were already placed there long before you came around. And so it's not a miracle that if you drop something, it'll fall to the ground. It's just the way that the world was designed, and your brain is the same way, and it works on this ideas or combinations of pre-existing ideas thing. So yeah, I guess I give some, but I got to tell you, I take some as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I would like to see, I'd like you one time, I'll give you $5 if you do this, but go into a big CEO and say, I want you to do what Christ did, and I want you to serve other people, and you are the healer of the company, and that's your role for 1 year, and see how well you do.
I would love to do that. You're going to have to give me a bit more than $5 though.
All right.
Unless I got the check ahead of time, like we were talking about.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to talk about that. Maybe we'll go into a monthly installment or something. All right. So then you jumped into it already, but, and now we can, I hate how little time we have, but friend of a friend. It really sounds like, It really sounds almost like we're talking about this scandal that's going on now. What's the deal with friend of a friend? And you already touched on the ethics involved with it. What's so good or bad about friend of a friend?
Yeah, so the fundamental premise of the book is that it's sort of the anti-networking book, and I realize a lot of places say that. But what I mean is that most of the books that are in the category of networking books are advice books. They are one guy or girl's story, although it's usually a guy, story about how I became a well-networked person and what have you, and it worked for me, so here's what I did, and you should try it too. And we consume those, and a lot of people get inspired by those, and then they go to the networking event or they go to the conference and they and they try and apply all of that advice. And what do they complain about? They complain about feeling inauthentic. They complain about feeling weird and feeling transactional. Well, of course you are, because you're literally trying to be someone else in that moment. Advice is autobiographical. So if you're trying to be or do the things that that person gave you as advice, and it's not working, it's because you probably don't have the same personality as that person or the same background. You're not in the same industry, et cetera. So the goal for me was to say, okay, what are the things that are universally true about how humans connect to each other? To learn that, you don't learn advice, you study the world of network science. And I'd written books, in both of my prior books, I'd written about studies from people like Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler and Brian Uzi and Jared Spiro, network scientists, people that study whole communities and how people interact. So that became the goal. What if there were a book that was, here's how networks work based on network science? And then you can figure out, okay, where do I need to go? Where are my strengths and weaknesses in this world, this community that I'm in? And how do I do that? And the fundamental mind shift that I'm trying to get through people's mind is we use terms often like build your network or grow your network. You can't do that. You exist inside of a network, your industry, your city, the whole country. I mean, we all live in one big network, 7.4 billion people strong and counting. And so the sooner you figure out that you are embedded inside of a network and how you interact with that network and how you create value with that network and build what the researchers would call social capital, that's what's more effective to you. So that doesn't look like collecting business cards. That doesn't look like trying to convert every conversation into a sale. It doesn't look like the kind of things that most people think are about looking, that make people feel dirty. It's about being a good friend to the people you already know, and then understanding that most of the people that you're going to meet are friends of friends, are one degree of separation out that you get introduced to. So that's sort of a nutshell version of the book. Each chapter is a different network science phenomenon, and then what it means for you and understanding the network that you're in.
All right, I got to go back to that term you used, network science, right?
Network science, yeah, it's an academic discipline. It's sort of it's a mix of mathematics, sociology, psychology, but it's the people who study who's connected to whom, and how it. And what's interesting is the people that study networks. I could name a bunch of different researchers. When I say the term network, it's often not just human. It's also ecological food networks. It's electrical grids. A lot of network science studies are done on the internet because it's actually an easily analyzable representation of connections that people are making to other people. Back in the day when when every website was made by a single person or a small team, instead of massive groups of people, it was really easy to look at the interconnections. And even today, actually, though there's a lot of political network science and network studies done on looking at sort of politics blogs and who links to each other, and all of those things. It's fascinating, but it's a very sort of multidiscipline academic discipline because a lot of different people from different fields sort of backed into, wait a minute, we need to study how things are interconnected to each other.
All right, because I want to track this down for just a minute. The first thing I want to say is that when these people are studying these networks, there is a totally different network when you're talking about a business network that you're trying to make yourself part of, and like a family network. Do they know that the dynamics, are they different or are they the same? And then we'll get to my theory. Yeah.
So, I'm not sure. They're definitely different culturally. I'm not sure they're all that different organization. I mean, a family tree is obviously its own sort of unique thing. But what we would call sort of the networks that people develop informally, friends and fellow hobbyists and that sort of thing, and the informal network of an organization looks really similar. Now, the org chart is a totally different thing, right? But you don't have to be in an organization longer than a few weeks to realize that however it's drawn out on paper isn't really how everybody's interacting anyway. And the executive assistants usually are the people that know the most about what's really going on and all of those sort of informal network things. Those tend to look very similar, and that usually is what gets studied inside of organizations, not necessarily what the formal org chart says it's supposed to be.
Well, here's what I'm getting at finally is I'm a simple person, and I like to boil everything down to the common denominator. And it would seem to me that for you to be successful in any network, you go up to somebody, let's say, and you give them your card. Oh, yeah, I'm looking for a job and yada, yada. And they put, whatever. But until you create a need for that person, you're not really, you're just like anybody else. And it would seem to me the battle is to create the need in whatever community that you're trying to get in. Is there any truth to that, or is that just way out there?
Yeah. So I would say what you're speaking to there is predominantly professional networking, trying to find clients, trying to find new business, et cetera. And yes, the way that I usually describe it to people is really similar to what you're saying. My advice to a lot of people is, we go to that unstructured networking event, which there's a lot of research says is not really the best way to apply it, or we put the word out that I'm looking for something, et cetera. And we still make it very egocentric. Here's what I do. Do you know anyone who wants what I do? No one wants that, right? As opposed to a need, what I often describe is, can you identify the life stage that somebody would be in when they realize they have this problem, or the problem that a business owner is facing that your product solves, et cetera? And when you're saying, oh, I'm looking for whatever, I wouldn't put it that way. I would ask, do you know anyone who is facing this, right? So that would be your sort of need. I would call it like a problem, or, like I gave a talk with a lot of car dealers, dealership owners, and that sort of thing. And the thing that I always talked about is it's not, do you know anyone who's looking for a car? Not a lot of people share that, like, hey, we're looking for a new car. They normally just announce to their friends and coworkers when they bought the new car. What you're looking for is, what is the life stage that they're about to face that starts the buying cycle? Did they just have a child? That means that little sports car is not going to work for them anymore. So they're going to be in that stage, right? Or are they expecting, right? So those are the questions that you want to ask. Do you know anybody that has teens that are about to turn 16? You're thinking about the used car, right? So you're looking for what that life stage is that precipitates the need, because most of us can then think of who is in that situation. But if we just say, here's who I am and what I have to offer, do you know anybody who needs that? No, that's just not the way humans think. That's not the way they broadcast their needs and emotions and desires to each other. So that's not going to work.
All right. So, David, we only have a few minutes left, and I still want to talk about this admission thing very quickly. But you said that you're the anti-friend of a friend. That's what the whole book is about. And
the
so
anti-networking book. Yeah.
And so, but because you don't want to, you don't want to be a name drop or whatever, but just, can you give some, like, one piece of advice from that book, or more if you like, on how not to, be the friend of a friend?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that to how to not be that sort of networking sleaze bag that everybody's trying to avoid. I think truthfully, if the biggest piece of advice I give to people is that if networking events make you uncomfortable, go ahead and skip them. Right. I think a lot of people go to these unstructured events, or to the meetup or the cocktail party after the conference that they're going to. And we try and focus in on, how do I make as many new connections as possible? How do I collect as many business cards as possible? And we know from the research in human behavior that at these unstructured events, most people end up spending time with people they already know. So you're actually swimming against the current if you're trying to collect as many business cards as possible. If you're trying to expand the number of people that you're looking to meet, the thing that you would want to do is ask yourself, what community am I looking to be a deeper part of? And then who do I know that's already a part of that community? And start spending a disproportionate amount of time with those people. Wherever it is you want to grow in your life or improve in your life, or even just know more people in, odds are you already know one or two people, or you have that friend of a friend connection to those people. So you probably already have, through sort of warm, friendly networks, some connection to those people. And then relationships are built on time. So the more time that you spend in those communities, the more contacts that you're going to make, and the deeper relationships you're going to have. and it's going to be more enjoyable because you're not running around trying to collect business cards and then find the time to build relations with people afterwards, which you're not going to do because you didn't do it last time anyway. So yeah, that would kind of be the big thing, is skip those events if you want. Just focus on who you already know and who is 1 degree of separation out from you, the friend of a friend, and spend more time with the people that you're looking to know more of those people or know more about those people up.
All right. And that's the last question I'm going to ask you towards this topic, is about time, because, especially like for young people, they're out of college or a lot of people are out looking for work, and time is so on a premium now. So how do you know, like when you're trying to get this job at a company, is there a way to know that maybe you should try something else? This just isn't happening. The relationship just isn't working. Are there signals companies give you, or?
So now that's an interesting question. Most of the time I advise people not, believe it or not, to look for, I want to work for a specific company. Because not only is that, I mean, just the probability of those matches working is hard, but it's also, all of us need a little room for serendipity in our life. So I think more about the industry or the sector, et cetera, that you're in. I encourage a lot of people. So if you're not focused on a specific company, what most of us do is we focus on that company. We try and work our way backwards to find a path, a chain of introductions that'll lead to that thing. I encourage a lot of people to take a broader approach of consistently asking, hey, who do you know in blank? Blank being the industry, blank being the sector, blank being the type of company that you want to work for. Because then you get a lot more connections. Now, how do you know when you're supposed to stop? Presumably when all of those connections have petered out and nobody's returning your phone calls anymore and what have you, then it may be time to change what's in the blank. The tactic.
Or the restraining order shows up.
Yeah, or the restraining order shows up. Or really, I mean, the other signal is that, and this is rare that it would happen, is you're asking as many people, hey, who else do you know that'd be good to talk to learn more about this industry? If they're all giving you the same names and they're all people that you've already interacted with, well, then you've gotten to know that cluster of people, and that community is not really all that interested in you. So go find a different cluster and a different community.
Great. Well, that is just amazing advice. I actually, David, just to confess, I'm trying to stump you on some of these questions, and you just fly right through them like a knife through butter. All right. So we have a few minutes left, and I want to talk to you about, you're an organizational psychologist. And I'm also an educator, and I will just give you a very quick background. When I was in the Middle East teaching, they did not understand that cheating was not correct. I had parents, I had uncles, I had family members, I had sheikhs come to my office, pass my whoever. And I would say, no, this is not, I'm an American. This is not the way it's done. This is academics. And, I was a poor kid and I had to go in the army to go through college. And I never heard of anybody cheating or anything. So I'm shocked by this. So I've been out of the loop, the U.S. educational system. A year in it, is this more prevalent than people know?
Well, I mean, I would say the interesting thing is that among elite institutions, when I say elite institutions, I mean maybe the top, not just Ivy League, maybe the top 100, national universities. So this includes a lot of the universities that were named in this raid that were not Ivies. It already kind of exists in some capacity. It's not as transparent as in a lot of other cultures, but I mean, every school kind of has that. If you make a donation big enough, we joke about it. That if you make a donation big enough, maybe that means your kids will get in and what have you. So the interesting thing is that, like, the real outrage is that this is a previously untried and hence unsanctioned by the culture way to get an edge. But those things have already existed, which is, by the way, sort of maddening and not how it's necessarily supposed to work. The other thing is, I mean, as far as I've read in the last 24 hours or so, the thing that I think is most interesting to me is that there's not a lot of evidence that these decisions were even being made in the best interest of the student themselves. Most of the time it sort of boils down to rich parent is paying a ton of money so that they can say their kids at Harvard or their kids at Yale when they're bragging at a cocktail party. Never mind if that's actually the right thing for that individual kid. And that's not maddening. That's just sad. And it's sort of a sorry state on where we are. Education in general is sort of headed for a reckoning. Right now, a lot of those elite institutions represent a brand name that people know if they get it on their resume. And, I study this from friend of a friend. If they're tapped into that certain network, that's going to provide more opportunity and more value to them. And I think we need to do a broader question about whether or not that's appropriate. I will say one of the most, ironically, I don't teach in an elite institution. And one of the things that is most encouraging that's going on in American education right now is this sort of the prevalence, and it doesn't get championed as much, but the prevalence of regional universities and even local universities that are expanding higher education to a much broader range of people, because it's the people downstream on the socioeconomic ladder for whom education makes a way bigger difference, right? This is the final irony of this cheating scandal, is that, like, you're the son of a billionaire investment manager. You're going to be fine whether you went to USC or not, right? But there are certain people for whom actually being able to go get that STEM degree and be the first person in their family to go to college is far more important. And so my hope is that this sort of furthers our, what's the right term? Our overemphasis on a few brand name universities and gets us as citizens to focus back on, no, college is still a huge benefit to a lot of people. How do we democratize it a bit more? How do we make it less exclusive? And right now it's clearly so exclusive that people are willing to cheat to get into it. That's a problem.
So if you are, not you, but if I'm at a company and I say, well, hey, I'm just getting an edge. I'm cheating. And when I was in the Army, they said, you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. So I'm kind of a philosopher, so I have my ideas about it. But for an organization that goes down that dark road, what do you think that really, and I'm just, throwing this out there, what are the implications for an organization that just starts that they just start to do things under the board? I don't mean legally, but just for employees. Does that really give them an edge?
Yeah, so if you go back to like the college scandal, the thing that I think is ironic is how morally flexible people are, because there's a pre-existing system whereby it's not just based on your test scores and your GPA and your extracurricular activities. Like, there already was a way for rich people to cheat. It just was culturally sanctioned because it came in the form of donations, et cetera. And it's very similar sort of in organizations, right? Like, knowing what the informal network is and leveraging nepotism and leveraging favoritism and those sort of things, they're legal. They're not necessarily appropriate. And that, in my view, the big downside, whether you end up involved in some crazy legal scandal or not, is that when systems like that are being leveraged and it's not being appropriately criticized, what you get is a minimizing of voices that you're supposed to hear, right? In favoritism dynamics, in sexism, in racism, in silos, politics, and turf wars, the net effect of all of those things is that less people feel like they can actually speak up and contribute their ideas. And that's a pretty big problem. We live in a time where I think most organizations are not facing problems that one genius who happened to go to Ivy League school can solve. Most of it, as I say in Mr. Creativity, most of our creativity at this point is a team sport, which means we need to be able to hear from a lot of different people. And when you're encouraging, and not even when you're encouraging by not discouraging a lot of those systems, that's the net effect, and that's what will end up being harmful to the organization in the long term, whether you're on some front page of Wall Street Journal scandal or not.
Yeah. Well, I will tell you right now, the first lawsuit, I have another YouTube channel, and there's a story I did this morning. They've already filed 2 suits, and one girl says that her degree from Stanford is a joke, and so she filed about that, and then another one from Yale says that she wants her admission money back, and damn it, punitive damages, because why did she apply at Yale if the whole system was rigged? So yeah. And like I said, I'm into philosophy and stuff, and Socrates, Plato once said, if everybody does it, the whole system breaks down, and you can't have a system. And that's why I'm an honest person, because I don't want you can't, if you lie, then what's the point of having truth? So anyway, you have some very great, those were some awesome answers. And I hope a lot of people will listen to this podcast, or at least I hope you spread that message a little bit farther. But David, I think we're out of time. I just want to tell everybody one more time, go to davidburkus.com. That is David's website. His podcast is The Daily Burk. And David is a speaker and an author and teaches one class at Oral Roberts University. How lucky is that? All right. Well, David, it's been a great honor to have you on Books in Hindsight. Any parting words?
Oh, just parting words of appreciation. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, it's really been nice talking to you, David. And you're my first podcaster, so I love your setup. I love how you've got everything set up behind you. So please, everybody, the books are going first to last: The Myths of Creativity, Under New Management, and David's last book, Friend of a Friend. So for everybody out there, thank you for listening. You can pick up this podcast at Spotify, Stitcher, Google, iTunes, and Google Play. And you can watch it on YouTube. And for all you kids out there and everybody else, get out there and read David's books. Get them at davidburkus.com or booksinhindsight.com. And please keep on reading.
This has been Books in Hindsight with your host, Matthew Hines. Please join us for our next podcast and look for our archives on iTunes and go to thehindsight.com. That's HEINES site.com for great books by Matthew Hines and other great authors.